Hello and welcome to another episode of Dear Rach and Soph with me, Rachel Johns, and my lovely
Sophie Green.
partner in podcast, that is, just in case anyone got the wrong idea there. Not that I
Well,
would
look, Rach, that
100%
could be a
happy to be your
rom-com.
partner in life as well.
Let's make our own rom-com there.
Yeah, exactly. Apologies if you or anyone listening can hear some like munching because my dog is devouring a bone on the floor by my feet. Well, kind of a bone. She's got this thing. Whenever I go shopping, she expects a treat. It's like a child.
Unreasonable.
I've got this. I don't know how I'm got into this habit, but I bring bags in and I put them on the table, and she's just hovering around. She meets us at the car sometimes to try, the
Oh,
garage.
okay.
And I usually only do it if I'm buying a lot of stuff, but she's started to get, more treats. So I did go to the shops just recently, and that's why she's now devouring a treat at my feet. So if you hear that, apologies.
I actually can't hear
Okay,
it.
that's
I
good.
don't think our listeners will be able to either.
That's because I haven't set up my nice, good mic yet, probably. So,
But your mic sound is fine, just
how
FYI.
are you anyway, Soph? Wasn't long since we
I'm
talked, but how's
No,
your
it's not
weekend
long,
been?
it's not long since we've spoken. For those who are listening slash watching, it's a couple of days since Rach and I have spoken to record a different episode. Yeah, fairly flat out. At the time we're speaking, I'm about to go to Sorrento Writers Festival for 3
Exciting.
which will be lovely. I'm actually really looking forward to it. Some of my colleagues from my day job will be there, as well as some people I publish. So
Oh, that's awesome. Yes, I've
yeah.
seen a few writers I know going along there, so I'm sure that will be fabulous. I'm actually going to the Sunshine Coast Hinterland Writers Festival the week
Oh.
after. So,
I
yeah.
was at the original one as a publisher. Well, as
Yes.
both of my personae. So,
Yes.
and it's God, what a beautiful part of the world to have a writers' festival.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It should be good. I'm actually very excited too that I'm also going to Holly Craig's Writers Retreat on Rottnest next week. I'm
Ah,
going, Anthea and I, my other partner in crime from my other podcast that I do and the online book club, we are speaking, like we're doing one session. And so literally we're staying for 3 days and having a nice few days on Rottnest by ourselves, even though we're doing one session at the retreat. So I'm very looking forward to that. So the next couple of weeks are nice and exciting, even though I have edits to do.
edits to do because Rach, do you have some news to share that we might be interested in?
I have finally finished my book, The Lucky Sisters, which I worked out last night. It's been about 6.5, 7 months, and that is quite a long time for me to have written, like to
As
write a
previously
book.
mentioned, you have had two other books published in that time.
Yes. Yes, I have, and it's been, Christmas and New Year and all the other things, and I've been on book tours and stuff, but I don't know. I'm very happy that the first draft is done. Although I did give it to my mum to read, and she had read most of it up until the last three chapters today. And something quite drastic happens in the very last sentence. Not want to give spoilers away. And her feedback was different. So we'll see what my publisher says. I think I might need an epilogue. And if I need an epilogue, that means I haven't quite finished. But I'm pretending I finished anyway. And yes, because I was quite far behind on my deadline, but the publisher still wanted to get it out this year. My publisher has read the first 100,000 words and has edited the first 100,000 words or given me structural feedback. So now I'm diving straight into that. So not even really a day to take a break, but it is what it is.
The
What
train
about you?
rolls on. Now, speaking of epilogues, you wrote a new epilogue for the Patterson Girls, if I'm
I
remembering correctly.
did.
And when is that new edition
Oh,
coming out?
I'm going to show you the edition. Excuse it. I've got a box on the floor. Here it is. I
Ah,
absolutely love this cover, and it looks even better in real life. So I did that, and that's another thing that I did. It's about 7,500 words. So I also some people might have been faster, but that took me about a week to do. So I did that also in the last, 5 months or so, sometime. I think I did it in January, which means that also happened. And I did also write something else and get that contracted, but it was only the beginning of that, the proposal for the #1 Instant Detectives Agency. So I guess I have had a lot on. I'm trying not to.
but
But
when's the
yeah,
Patterson Girls coming out?
this book is out on the 1st of May. We should have done it in our
My God,
May
yes.
release episode. I didn't even think about that. which we
Mind you,
were
at the
just
time
the
this
other
is
day.
published, yeah,
What's
actually,
that?
at the time this episode goes out, we probably will have posted May new releases. So yeah, those of you who've already listened to the May new releases, the Patterson Girls should have been in it. Just
Yes, and the Patterson Girls is a reprint of the original version. I did no editing whatsoever on that, so it's exactly the same as the original version, but there is a bonus a bonus epilogue that follows this. This book is about four sisters and a family curse, and it's 10 years after the end of the book. It shows you what the sisters are up to now, and that was very fun to write, Sophie. I thoroughly recommend doing that with one of your books. I had a few people ask, "Oh, can you do it with other books?" And if I have time, haha, maybe I will do some for like just the Substack or like bonus content, because it was really fun, sort of thinking about what your characters are up to. And the best part of it was that I didn't really have like there's a little bit of structure there. Actually, this possibly leads into what we're going to talk about today with our guest, because in most novels there is structure, right? I would say that's kind of um, and you have to have like the beginning, the middle and the end, as we were taught at school, and there's a story arc, right, and the arc of the characters as well. Like often our characters start someplace and end in a different place, and I don't mean necessarily physically or location wise. I mean that they change, they grow, all that kind of stuff. The good thing about the epilogue is I didn't really feel like I had to have that complete arc for anyone. There is, as I said, there is a little bit of structure in there. It kind of is in three parts, which fell into it, but it's not a complete story. It's more a slice of life, and that was fun. And what I mean that maybe that leads into today's discussion, or part of today's discussion. Today we have a guest on reading. What's it? A guest on.
You almost said reading between deadlines, didn't you?
On dear Rach and Soph. And this guest is going to talk a bit about what I was calling a quiet novel. But I'll talk more about this conversation, but she calls a plotless novel. And I've done some Googling since then, and I think plotless novel is more of the term used than quiet novel. And that is where, there's not necessarily that really defined structural arc in the novel. So our guest is Danielle Binks. Should I read her bio before she comes on?
Yes, go right ahead.
I've just got to find where it is on my screen. I've got a million, windows open, and it's disappeared. There we go. Okay. Danielle Binks is a Melbourne-based writer and literary agent with Jacinta DeMasi Management. She's the author of the best-selling middle-grade book, The Year the Maps Changed. Love that title, by the way. And the award-winning young adult books, Begin, End, Begin, a hashtag Love Oz YA anthology, as well as The Monster of Her Age. Her latest middle-grade novel is Six Summers of Tash and Leopold. God, I'm not doing a very good job of reading today. Danielle also teaches fiction and young adult writing in the Associate Degree of Professional Writing and Editing at her alum, RMIT University. And that is why I want to talk to her particularly today. We're going to talk to her to start with a little bit about her teaching of plotless novels. And then you're going to talk to her more about her role as, I guess, children's and YA author, and also possibly an agent.
Yes.
So yeah, it should be a fun chat.
It should be. So I'm going to put us on pause, and we will welcome Danielle in, and I'll see you on the other side, Rach.
See ya. Well, I am super excited to have Danielle here. As I said, we've already introduced you, so our listeners will know how fabulous you are. But I was trying to remember. So we have known each other online for quite some time. And I'm trying to remember if we actually met in person before last year at the Festival of Fiction. I think we said we hadn't.
I don't know. I think I witnessed you at the Romance Writers of Australia conferences in the past, like on the stage, but I don't think I was at your level to have had a
I don't think we ever had a conversation. We probably like passed it like ships. So it was lovely to finally meet you in person last year in Perth at the Festival of Fiction. And I was trying to write, probably the novel which I just finished literally today.
I remember
was
this.
stupidly decided that, you know, I'll find a quiet room and take my laptop and write, you know, between some of the sessions, because dinner was in the evening and I didn't want to go all the way home and stuff. Of course, then I got spotted by Danielle not writing, but reading a novel. I'm pretty sure I was reading. I can't remember what I was reading. Or maybe I wasn't. Anyway, Danielle came in, and for some reason we got on to chatting about books, as you often do at festivals when you're authors, but particularly we got on talking about what I was calling at the time a quiet novel. Last year I wrote a Substack called Ode to the Quiet Novel, because I was really enjoying books like Tom Lake by Anne Patchett, Sandwich by Catherine Newman, One Day by David Nichols, and a whole load of other books that didn't really seem to have much externally going on, but I was captivated by and just couldn't stop reading. So that's what I'd really love. Then you said, oh my goodness, I know exactly what you mean. You said, I love those novels too. In fact, I teach a course called Plotless Novels. And I was like, I want to go to your course about Plotless novels because it sounds amazing. But the second best thing is inviting you on our podcast to chat about Plotless novels and pick your brains. So before we get started and I ask you all the questions, I just thought I would do a little bit of a definition of what I found out quiet novels to be online. Not quiet novels, sorry, plotless novels. So my definition was character-driven novels, very much about the internal lives and relationships of the main characters that don't have anything much external or spectacular driving the plot, but something about them grips me so they can't stop reading. Google's definition says plotless novels are those that prioritize character development, atmosphere, and theme over a traditional linear narrative structure with clear beginning, middle, and end. Novels that focus on characters' thoughts and feelings and reactions to the events and the relationships around them. And apparently BookTok has another term for them. I don't know if you've heard of this. Have you, Danielle?
Well, I am on BookTok and I have heard discussions of plotless novels and a couple of plotless novels that have broken through the BookTok barrier. So yeah, I'm curious to know what they say about it.
Apparently, all vibes, no plot.
Perfect. That is the most succinct definition. Of course, BookTok just summarizes it perfectly.
I love it.
I love that.
No, it's so good. So I was wondering, how do you define a plotless novel for your students?
Well, first of all, I don't teach the entire course on it. I teach a unit on plotless novels. It takes a day, probably because they're plotless. I can't say much more than it's all vibes, no plot. What more do you want?
Yeah, you can just say that and say, go and have a coffee and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
I'll just tell them to scroll BookTok and be like, that's kind of the gist. It is a unit that I teach within towards publication, which is a kind of bigger unit for students who have nearly completed a novel or who want to know what to do with their manuscripts when they leave uni, like, you know, a little bit of the industry and a little bit of the fundamentals of writing and editing still. And whenever I mention the plotless novel, their eyes always light up because they think, I don't have to worry. Yeah, I don't have to worry about plot anymore. Danielle's been teaching us that there are internal stakes, external stakes, and philosophical stakes. If I take one of those away, it's way easier to write, surely.
No, I would say no.
I'm like, okay, baby children, honey child, I know this seems like the easy get out of jail free card, but to carry a plotless novel, it is all vibes and it is voice. Yeah. Voice has to be extraordinarily good and thrilling. Almost like the voice is so thrilling. It's like a magic trick. It's like a look at how charismatic I am so that you don't realize I'm trying to talking shit and nothing's really happening. Right? So then I give some concrete examples of plotless novels. And the classic one that I always go to is I ask for a show of hands who here has read Donna Tartt's The Secret History.
A long time ago. I need to read it again.
Because this is a writing course with RMIT, generally at least half the class. So in more recent years, it's been a little less than that. And I've been quite surprised. But, you know, I'll get a few who are like, oh, yes, when I was 15. And I'll be like, we are one and the same. Did we not all go through the same? Yeah, of course we did. And I'll basically say to them what happens in that book. And they always begin with, well, there's this class. I'm like, perfect summarization. Then I pull out the book, or I have it on the screen, the very first page. And if you have a copy, reading it, if you're following along at home and you have a copy, go and pull it out, read the first page. Bunny's dead body is discovered in a snowbank on the very first page. And it tricks you into thinking, oh, is this going to be a murder mystery? No, it's not. We're going to yeet back in the timeline to how Bunny got to be involved in this little society of bookish twerps in this college campus. It's a total magic trick. They start with a murder, the same way a recent one that Book Talk loved was R.F. Kuang's Yellowface, which I would also categorize as plotless. A death happens within the first chapter.
Oh, we lost Sophie.
Oh, she can come back.
Okay, hopefully we'll keep going.
You are host now.
What is really interesting, I was going to say about the secret history, is I just looked it up.
Yeah.
And it's I thought it was a long novel, whereas a few of the plotless novels I've read are quite short.
Yeah. They tend to be, yeah.
It's 201,000 words.
Yeah.
Like, I just
huge.
can't believe.
And I promise you, you eat those words up. Donna Tartt is so good, you don't notice how long she's taking to say not a lot. And you just go with her for the entire thing. But yeah,
I think that's the thing, isn't it? They're so, like, when we were saying before, you know, is it easy? Like, no, because you have to have so much skill to be able to carry a whole novel without actually much action or, you know.
So much skill. So much skill. And Rachel, dare I say, I think one of the reasons that you love a plotless novel is they are quite common in romance.
Yes.
If you think about it, there's lots of romance, particularly old school romance, where the kind of kickoff to the story would happen when the first chapter. If you think back to the kidnapped on her wedding night type thing, when the marriage begins in the first chapter, right?
And then you're just seeing them kind of work through their issues.
They're already married. They have to stay married because that's the plot. They have to be happily ever after. This is quite old school. But I was also thinking, you know, Tessa Dare's Goddess of the Hunt is a young girl decides, I'm going to finally be married. I'm going to practice on my brother's older best friend, who I think is quite cute. They kiss very early on. And there's an attraction, and suddenly the idea of looking on the marriage mart for a hubby goes out the window because she's like, actually, this guy who I was just going to practice on is quite cute. He's at the family estate for a holiday with them, and that's the entire book, and it all happens within the first. So if you go back,
I haven't read that one. Is that worth reading?
It's one of her early. It's like her first, and it's really good. Yeah. But a lot of romance books are plotless. You know, it's the setup happens in the first chapter trying to hook us readers. Yeah. And then there is a kind of it's not complacency by any means, because it has to be good writing to keep you turning the page. Yeah. But there is something comforting almost about knowing what the patter is going to be of, okay, these two are going to end up together, but how are they going to end up together when they hate each other at the start? Yeah. And there is that assurance of, by the end, they will be happily ever after in love. And that's quite plotless. It is all vibes. It is a promise of, stick with me, champ, and you're going to, you know, get your heart rate going. Yeah. But not a lot's going to happen in the plot, because pretty much, you know, back in the ye olde times, they're going to stay stationary in one location. And it does spin around. These characters have got to be very charismatic and attractive. And my writing is going to be compelling enough that even though you know how it's going to end, you'll stick with me. So a lot of romance commercial fiction is largely plotless, and it works beautifully. But it's not easy. If everyone could write a New York Times best-selling romance novel, they would. Yes. It's not, and you know, a lot of the time when you go and read the opposite of a plotless novel, a novel that is all, it's kind of like the Jack Reacher books, right? Yeah. It's kind of like Lee Child, where it's going to be one thing after another of plot happening, very external state. And the internal's not really there. It's generally books about some bloke who's going to travel from town to town with a woman in every port. And there's always a calamity that only he can figure out and solve. Yeah, yeah. But the calamity is why you come to the page. Those are very plot driven, but also kind of plotless vibes only as well. Yeah, I know. It's confusing if you start to talk about it too much. It's way confusing. Look, I think it's easiest if you go if this is your vibe, it's if you like Donna Tartt's A Secret History, if J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, just walking around New York City with Holden Caulfield was your jam growing up
Yeah.
because you were a little emo kid, same. Nothing really happens. And R.F. Kuang's Yellowface, one of the better examples from recent memory of
Yeah.
a death happens very early on, and then you see someone spinning their wheels trying to not get found out as a complete fraud. That's
Yeah.
Plotless. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I think you mentioned that, you know, you teach it, you probably wouldn't ever write one, or you haven't, like, what, but then you've written, you know, yeah, because the reason I would love to write a book like this, right?
Me too.
But I don't know if I could. And that's interesting because I don't feel like a lot of my books, I mean, now you've said about romance, it's really interesting because I never thought about that way. But I don't feel like a lot of my books are hugely plot driven. They're more, well, not externally plot driven. Like I know when I went to, you know, romance writing conferences in my early years of trying to write a romance, and they'd be talking about external conflict and internal conflict. And, you know, I always struggled to come up with like really big external conflicts kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the same time, I just think like I don't know, have you read Sandwich by Catherine Newman?
Yes, loved it.
Absolutely loved that. That could have been the book we maybe started talking about last year.
Yeah, perfect holiday book as well. Like perfection. Yes.
So it's like, for anyone who hasn't read it, hasn't listening, it's basically a woman in, I think, her early 50s. She's kind of going through menopause. She's been married for, you know, a long time. She's got two adult kids and she's on holidays with them and the son's girlfriend, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yep.
And they're just on holiday in Cape Cod. And there is like a bit of a deep backstory kind of thing, but it's not what carries the plot in a lot of ways. It's just like they're all on holiday, they're eating sandwiches and
yeah, it's just it's the how excruciating it is to be on holiday with people that you know and love. And how that can
wonderful
be painful.
and excruciating.
Yeah, and how that can be great and painful, and we can all relate, and it's perfect. Yeah,
and
totally.
I just actually on that level, and I was going to say it in a minute because I've got a few more questions, but I also read in research for this podcast, I read an article from Elle magazine. I can't remember what it was called actually, but it had it was talking about Coco Mello's as her books being kind of in this plotless novel genre. I've only read Blues Sisters. I haven't read
Cleopatra and Frankenstein. Yeah.
And also Mona Awad, who wrote Bunny, I think it was, and a few others. I haven't read any of hers either because I kind of shy away. Like I really liked Sandwich, I think, because it was a more mature woman.
Yeah.
Stuff like a lot of the plotless novels I feel are like someone in their late 20s, you know.
Yeah.
Their existential crisis and all this, and I just don't. It bores me that era.
It's definitely the trend, and I think because as we live through trying times, like we're all sick of extraordinary times. We just want we just want to be whelmed, not overwhelmed, not underwhelmed. We just want to be whelmed. To quote 10 Things I Hate About You, I just want to be whelmed. And so the plotless novel is kind of, I'm going to subtract the anxiety of external stakes and just give you how rotten it can be to be human sometimes. And that's kind of like, okay, that's kind of nice. And I would say, I think it really probably kicked up a gear around the time of Phoebe Waller-Bridge's Fleabag, which is also kind of plotless. Because when you ask, what is this about? You can't help but say it's about this woman called Fleabag. We don't even know if that's her name.
Yeah.
But she's just going through it. And yes, stuff has happened, but it happened kind of off screen, the death of her friend, the death of her mother. And we're dealing with her in the repercussions of these calamities in her life. The external calamities have happened, and now we're seeing her sinking, basically. And I think that also kind of showed people that they really wanted character-driven stories. They didn't need constant Marvel superheroes in their face and like 20 spin-offs, that they could just watch a British woman be charming and lovely to the outside world and then totally be in a heap with her hamster or guinea pig in her little cafe that was sinking into green mud. Like it was just a really good bit of storytelling and just good characterization. And that's, I think, what people ultimately want is great voice, great character, And if you don't deliver on whiz bang plot, that's okay sometimes.
Yeah. Well, Mona Awad said in this magazine article, and I think this really, I snatched two little definitions out that they had. And Mona Awad said, the beauty of a story is not necessarily the movements of a plot. It's being immersed in another world. This is what you've been saying, another person's experience or consciousness, and seeing the world through their eyes. The atmospheric details of an imagined world is an addictive drug, and the vibe is truly what I stay for. But it's true. It is that just really feeling, I think you feel like you're just a part of what you're reading, like you're a part of these people. You know, you're either one of their relations or a close friend or whatever. Like you really feel like you know them intimately.
Totally.
And Coco Mellors said her recipe for plot formulation is characters times time equals change. She explains the mechanism often offers a valuable structure for visualizing the end of a novel. If characters are stagnating or not changing, it ultimately won't make for an exciting or dramatic storytelling. But watching a character change substantially, regardless of whether or not that evolves from the tropes of traditional plot elements, is still a compelling plot. And I'm just trying to think about, I don't know, my memory of The Secret History is bad. Do they change in that? Like, do the characters change?
I would say there's quite like a novice character who comes into higher education and is quite swayed by a pretty nutty professor.
Yeah.
And they it's kind of cultish. They all kind of come to this person's cult of personality eventually, and the way that he kind of pushes them just to see if he can is
I'm definitely going to reread that. I think it's been so long, and I'm just, super.
It's pretty great.
I loved it so much at the time, and yeah, it's one of those ones I'd like to reread. So I'm just going to have a quick look at my questions to see we've covered a lot of different things. So is there any do you believe you need to be? I'm just going off track of what I had thought here and going on a tangent, but then telling myself no and talking myself out of it because I was thinking. We've said, right, you need to be you need to be a really strong storyteller or a really strong writer to be able to carry this off. And I was going to say, so do you feel like, most people wouldn't be able to do this right off the bat? But then a lot of these debut novels are amazing and they are in that.
Yeah, it is probably actually a lot of debuts who probably didn't go to a writing class or a writing conference and were never probably taught, hey, where's your external plot? So
I love that.
maybe I'm ruining my students by saying to them external plot, internal plot, philosophical stakes. What are we doing here? Maybe maybe there's something quite natural about sitting down and just thinking that a story is somebody's life.
Yeah,
and
that's
life
true,
is
actually.
big enough that you don't need to put, a car bomb is about to go off in 50, like maybe you don't need that. But I also think a lot of these are people probably reading within their preferred genres or readerships. For instance, it's why I think so many plotless novels are romance, probably because romance readers, their journey to becoming writers is reading a lot of romance. Hence why I think there's so much plotless novel in the romance genre, is because they read themselves and they kind of learn story writing technique from reading other writers. So it's not unheard of if you read a lot of historical fiction for there not to be huge plots, that it can all happen in the very beginning and be quite top heavy at the start. And then the rest is just characters falling in love, and that's completely fine. So maybe it is over teaching or probably not reading enough.
I think that's go, Soph.
Because from an industry point of view, though, I'm intrigued for you as an agent, Danielle. So you're both receiving pitches and you are pitching to publishers. How do you think an author would go with a plotless novel they're pitching to you, and then how would you pitch one to a publisher, particularly if it's a debut, right?
Such a good question.
Once upon a time, I probably would have called it a quiet book. And that would have been industry code for it's quite literary or it's quite voice driven. But now, because of things like Book Talk being so open about how books are structured and the breakdown of them, I probably would lead with the hook of it's a plotless novel and look at how big these are. Mellor for sure, R.F. Kuang for sure. I would probably say, hey, hand on heart, I wouldn't come to you with a plotless novel were it not brilliant voice. Trust me, bro.
I think Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano, which I loved. I think that's a plotless novel.
Yeah. I think when it was tagged quiet novel, publishers probably would have gone, here we go. It's going to be, impenetrable, boring, dull. But now I think the plotless novel has kind of reinvigorated it and got people talking about it, precisely because we're at a point with social media is showing a little bit behind the curtain and we're realizing and we're able to articulate more the things that are connecting us. And it's kind of like we're all connecting our own personal algorithms. So I can say, I love Fleabag. What are books like Fleabag that I want to read more of? Or it's like this particular episode of Girls that I love where Marnie reconnects with her ex. And, you know, and I can like be my own little algorithm kind of connecting the dots of stuff that interests me and realize character driven, women of a certain range, all of that kind of stuff is just perfect for me. So
And
I think I would probably be honest with a publisher and saying it's plotless, and that's not a bad thing anymore.
Yeah.
anyone who hasn't found Danielle on TikTok, please do, because she gives great book recommendations. And so every time I see one of Danielle's videos, I'm like, well, that's going on the TBR, that's going on the TBR. And it's also the way you describe them makes them appealing. So you unsurprisingly, you're great at pitching books. You're pitching them on Book Talk to people who may wish to read them. So yeah, if you're looking for something to read, go to you're there as I think as Danielle Binks.
Yes, correct.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Look for Danielle Binks on TikTok.
Please find me. I don't know how to find other people. Find me. Yes.
I think we've almost I can't even think of what I'm trying to say.
Extinguished.
Yeah, or had enough of this conversation. I love this conversation. What I mean is I know you want to talk about some other things. So
how funny that we could talk for ages about plotless novels.
Yeah.
That seems,
I know,
incongruous, but okay.
So funny. But like I was thinking, you have actually helped me think more. As I said, that whole romance thing was mind blown about plotless novels.
Yeah, that's blown my mind too.
Yeah,
you're most welcome. This is the fun part of being a teacher. I also kind of ruin reading for people, so you can never just take your brain out. But we all experience that working in publishing.
100%.
You can never just read a book and just sink into it. Part of your brain is going, how did they do that? So I'm quite happy that I've now ruined more reading for you. You're welcome.
That's okay. I already was ruined because yes, I think it's like if you've done a film degree, you can't watch a movie without picking it apart. And I do find it quite hard to read. Like I enjoy reading. Almost every book I read. And so it's not that it removes the enjoyment from me, but I do read differently, and I'm sure you both do, than someone who's completely just a reader. And totally. I either go, why am I even bothering? This is so good, and how do they? Or I'm learning from little bits of just I'm constantly analyzing.
We're all active reading. You can't ever be a passive reader again once you work in the industry, which is kind of sad,
and
but also
pretty ruthless. I think those of us in the industry would become extremely ruthless.
Yeah. I think it's one of the reasons. Well, I know it's one of the reasons why I took so long to get published. It's because I didn't read anything hardly in high school. I sort of fell away from reading for various reasons, and so when I decided to write a novel when I was like 18. I was really, really behind the times. So I did things like you said, go to writers' courses and all that kind of stuff. But what really helped me is becoming a voracious reader and refining my love for reading. And I saw actually today on Substack that Claire Stevens, who is an author and podcaster too, had posted something about here we are. It says. A thought on writing. Does anyone else feel like metaculture about writing, where we voraciously consume books and podcasts and articles and notes about how to write, what we're doing wrong, the very best advice, the formulas, the golden structure, etc., can ultimately compromise our instincts? I love reading and writing, but, and then she goes on, but I said 100%, 110% actually, that the best thing we can do for our writing is just to read and read more. But when you're saying you're possibly spoiling, people, they would be going to writing classes no matter what. I know. What do you say if you say that some people just want to, soak all that information? Hopefully they're reading as well.
I'll admit, hand on heart, as a writing teacher, that you don't need to study writing to be a writer. You need to be a reader. And it's why when writers come to my class and they kind of say to me that they're not reading, that they just want to be a smooth, clean slate, untouched by the rest of the written word, I'm like, you can't. There's no way.
Question on that, because we answered this question, I think, early on from a reader, saying to us, do we read while we write? And I'm 100% do, because as you said earlier, I'm pretty much writing all the time because I'm writing 2 books a year. If I didn't read books while I wrote, I would have very limited time to read.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing you're the same, that you read while you're writing? Or?
I don't read in the genre and readership
yeah.
that I'm writing in, which is middle grade at the moment, middle grade historical fiction. So
But
I
you
just
keep
I
reading
just
other,
avoid that. I just read other stuff, and it's where
Yeah.
my reading gets really wild because I want to empty my brain out and give it a rest from what I'm writing. So I provoke it with stuff that I would never dream of writing. So it's when I
Yeah.
get really deeply into reading like adult crime novels or nonfiction, historic nonfiction, but not to do with the history that I'm writing about. You know, I
Yeah.
get really, poetry becomes really big for me when I'm writing as well, just because, you know, the economy of words is quite beautiful for provoking.
Have you got some favorite poets you can recommend?
Oh God, I'm old school Emily Dickinson first and foremost all the time. Evelyn Arlen from Australia is brilliant. The book Ruby Moonlight is one of my absolute favorites. Megabala books generally I love for their poetry collections.
Okay, interesting.
Lemons in the Chicken Wire, Alison Whittaker. Oma Seika, yeah, I just love Megabala books in particular for their poetry collections.
Great.
I think they're superb. So yeah, just to empty my brain out somewhere else, like put my brain in a different location from where I put it when I'm writing, I find that I just get really, kind of out there with my reading habits just to avoid what I would normally be reading, which is the stuff that I'm currently writing. So, but I'm always reading. And if I
that's a
wasn't
good tip.
if I wasn't reading, I think I would forget why I was writing, because it provokes in me the feeling of a reader that makes me go, oh, to do this and get that feeling from a reader is the whole reason that we do this. So if I read something and I move to tears by it, or I move to laugh out loud, or I move to recommend it, it kind of makes me go, that's why we do this. That's ultimately the whole gambit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip for those, particularly I think it's often aspiring writers who say, oh, they don't read while they're writing. That just don't read in your genre if you're worried, but don't give up books.
Also, why would you not want to read? Like, why would you not want to?
I don't know. I literally have to read every day, or I will
Sophie,
start getting crazy.
You'll appreciate this. The way I put it to my students, those who say, oh, I can't read while I'm writing, I say, do you think you'd ever hear a musician say, oh, I can't listen to music while I'm creating my album? No, I hate music. Oh, can't do it. Like, it just wouldn't. If you are a musician, you live and breathe music. You can't get away from it. If you are a writer, you live and breathe writing, and that means the reading of it as well. And I would suggest, if you're a writer who can turn that tap off, I'm going to suggest maybe you're not actually going to be a writer. You want to have written, not to be a writer. You want to be that person.
We love the hard line talk on this pod, don't we, Sophie?
No, I think you want to be able, this is going to sound quite hard line. You want to be able to say you're a writer, even more than having written. You want to be able to tell someone else that you have written something, and that's a different function in the world than actually being interested in writing. And it's fine, but perhaps if you really want to creatively express yourself and you're not reading, but you're saying that you want to write, maybe writing is not the right mode of transmission. Maybe you should find what is the right mode of transmission, and also be unattached to any one particular mode of transmission until you've found the right one.
Correct. And I would go, it's fine if you're in a reading rut. That happens to all of us. But I would suggest even those of us who go into reading ruts, it's so unnatural that we still look around for ways that we can break it. So when I'm in a reading rut, that's when I overly rely and have audiobooks, which I listen to all the time anyway. But when I'm in a reading rut, I really look for, and I'll often reread books, my favorite books, on audiobook to try and break that rut. I can never be content with not reading. I can do it for maybe a week, and that's my rut, but then I have to get back to it. Otherwise, my writing goes downhill. And absolutely it does, because I forget why I'm doing this. And I forget through osmosis the way that this is done by my betters, by my colleagues. So yeah, I'm always reading. I have to be.
And there's a lot of... Sorry, go on,
Rach. You go first.
I was going to say, there's a lot of great long form journalism as well. See, I read a ton of that. I have for many, many years been a consumer of magazines. I love a long article. And there's actually some really, really good storytelling in articles, as in non-fiction articles. If you go to even a magazine like Tatler, which a lot of people may not consider, but Vanity Fair, especially the olden days, Undergrad and Cover and Tina Brown, there's a lot of excellent long form storytelling, tens of thousands of words sometimes. So
Yeah.
and those things are in their archives, the New Yorker, the
Yeah.
Atlantic. There's a lot of really
Yeah.
good writing in the Atlantic. So even if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to read around my genre, and perhaps you're still finding your genre of fiction, for example, go to some great nonfiction articles.
Yeah, that's so true. I still read the news. I still have my favorite reporters that I read kind of religiously because I so enjoy their voice. I think
Yeah.
of someone like John Silvester, who writes the crime beat for the Age and Sydney Morning Herald, who like broke the big underbelly stories of the Melbourne underbelly. And I just think he's got such a great, like, Raymond Chandler-esque, when he really gets into a story, it can be like a little mini short story. So yeah, I still, even when I'm not reading, I'm reading and consuming stories and words in other ways, not necessarily book form all the time.
Like, I read Will Swanton's sports coverage in the Australian because he has a really particular voice about sport.
Yeah.
And Andrew Webster, who used to be at Nine Newspapers, has now gone to the Australian, for some mysterious reason, was let go from Nine Newspapers when they were doing some redundancies. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, the Australian would be smart to pick him up, and they did.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah, Andrew has a particular way of storytelling that's actually really heart-centered in terms of writing about the sportsmen involved and sportswomen involved. So anyway, we're digressing. Rach, I interrupted you.
Can I just ask one question before we move on to changing readerships? You mentioned sometimes you will re-listen or reread a book that you've loved before. What are on your reread lists?
Oh, Melina Marchetta and The Piper's Son in particular, which is one of my favorite books of hers. And the male narrator of The Piper's Son has a sexy voice. It's just a good audiobook narration voice.
Excellent. That helps.
He's not narrated anything else. And trust me, I've searched for his name, being like, sir, I will follow you wherever you go, but he's not narrated anything else. And I think it's criminal. And he just has that soft Australian accent that when done properly in an audiobook, you're like, oh, that's why British gals fall for it. That's why, you know,
his name is Michael Finney, for anyone who's curious.
Michael Finney, if you're listening at home, could you please?
Could you please do our books on audio?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, please. So The Piper's Son by Melina Marchetta, but I will re-listen to all of Melina Marchetta's books. On the Jellicoe Road, Saving Francesca in particular, great audiobook as well. And I will find new aspects of them. Particularly as she's a young adult writer, I'll find that I now relate to the adult characters, to the parent characters, to the teacher characters, which is always really fun to realize, oh, I'm growing up with her characters. That's kind of nice. So Melina Marchetta is always my number one. I do enjoy listening to David Sedaris on audiobook because his voice is so unique, and sometimes I need him in his accent, particularly his southern accent, to tell me how a story pitter-patter is meant to go. But I also quite like when he writes for the New Yorker or New York Times and they do an audio version of his articles. I really enjoy listening to those. He's a great one to have in my ear holes as well, just because it's such a great voice. I'm rereading The Hunger Games at the moment, which is, let me just double check. I love the actor from Orphan Black is the narrator of The Hunger Games. What is her name?
Is it Tatiana, the main actor?
Tatiana Maslany, from Orphan Black. So she's the narrator of the original Hunger Games trilogy. So I'm rereading those on audiobook because I obviously just read the latest one, Sunshine on the Reaping, and loved it and decided I had to go back to the start again. So yeah, there's just a lot that I love on audiobook, and audiobook is a kind of newish love for me that I discovered in lockdown. My hands down favorite audiobook narrator is Pobnen Coldbrook-Smith, who narrates Ben Aronovich's Rivers of London books. He drew me into audiobooks, and I now can't read those books without him telling me the story. I couldn't read them myself. I need him to be narrating for me because he's so intrinsic to the entire experience for me now.
Wow, so that's amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you for the chat on Plotless novels. I'm going to now hand over to Sophie to be the main host while we talk about something else.
And I'm sure, Rach, you'll be talking about this as well. So I wanted to talk to Danielle, speaking in the third person now to our listeners / viewers, about children's and YA books in particular, because not only is Danielle an author in that space, but she is an agent. But I'm going to actually start, and this is actually related to talking about this. So we were talking about rereading books. So I read Catcher in the Rye, which you mentioned earlier, Danielle, by J.D. Salinger in year 8, because I was, thinking I was so far ahead of my time. It was prescribed text in year 11. And this is both about the Plotless novel and about categorizing books, which we're going to talk about. So when it was prescribed text for my English class in year 11, I decided that the way I would remember quotes from the books, I always like to have quotes to put into exams, was just to keep reading it. So I read it over and over again in year 11. And it was that, so what we were just talking about with the Plotless novel and the vibes and everything, it became like this Zen koan that I would get to the end of Catcher in the Rye and I would start again. I lost count of how many times I read it in that year, but Holden Caulfield was accompanying me through year 11. But the interesting thing about that is that, so I read it in year 8, it was prescribed in year 11. It was definitely categorized as young adult fiction when I was at school. But I look back now and go, what? Because it's these, and also The Outsiders, one of my favorite books of all time. Such a great movie. We had that in year 8 so I was reading Catcher in the Rye. It's just to read it, but The Outsiders was a prescribed text in year 8. And now I don't know that it would come within cooey of any kind of curriculum for teenagers. So I'm really interested in discussing, first of all, the definitions as you see them, especially for young adult, middle grade, whether we're still using the term younger readers, because I think for writers as well as for people who are buying books for children, these categories can be confusing, and then category creep, for lack of a better term.
So that's fascinating. Both J.D. Salinger and S.E. Hinton were not writing young adult literature at the time because it didn't exist at the time. The first YA book was published 1946, I want to say, 17th Summer, Surname Daily, and that was the most technical. That is a YA novel. S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders and J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye were both retroactively labeled young adult, and it was very much the 1-2 punch of, yes, it deals with young people, but what really pushed into the category was young people actually were reading it, which was like a phenomena that had never really happened before. And particularly with S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, originally published as adult fiction, didn't really do a lot, and then suddenly the publisher realized it was blipping and was having a lot of sales because teachers and librarians were buying it for their students to read, who were consuming it in suddenly large numbers. So this was like kind of the first time that the category was realized as, oh, this is a particular interest for young people. But actually, the New York Public Library had been doing a lot of work, and they were the ones who coined the term young adult literature, because back in the day, like, we're talking pre-World War II as well, the New York Public Librarians were tasked with getting teenagers off the streets, get them into the library. And they very quickly realized that teenagers were different to children and that they weren't interested in the same books as children, not picture books, not early chapter readers. They wanted something different. So they called it young adult literature. And then suddenly the rest of society, also post World War II then, were very interested in teenagers because they were the protected society. They were the protected generation who weren't going to be killed on the war machine. They had to be allowed to live and grow up, and they suddenly had a little bit more freedom. They didn't just have to go down the coal mines, because by then we'd also had the Industrial Revolution and the recognition of the rights of the child. But more importantly, they were the protected generation who weren't going to die. So their parents and their grandparents wanted them to live. So go out and have fun, kids. Go out and buy blue jeans, listen to rock music. Not really. We're going to complain about it still. And, there's this great, I want to say it was a New York Magazine article about Tulsa twins. And it was from like 1944 or something. They actually sent out a journalist to follow these 2 Tulsa twins. I think they were like 15 or 16-year-old girls, and they followed them around and asked them questions like, why do you call your friends after school when you've just seen them in school? and evidently these were all questions that a lot of parents had about their kids and how they were growing up. And it was, where the word teenager came into effect kind of largely as well, was suddenly everyone post-war was having these same experiences of, we have these kids who we're letting a lot of stuff slide because we feel bad that, a whole generation has died, but they get to live and we want them to feel comfortable. But suddenly they want to go down and have sodas at the soda shop, and they want to go to the movies all the time, and they're really big into football games. And, you know, this was a very Americanized definition, but at the same time, you look to Japan, which was kind of conquered by the Americans, and Japanese teenagers were also fascinated by American youth culture. They also desperately wanted to wear blue jeans and listen to rock music like Elvis Presley. You also look in like Soviet era Germany, Berlin, and they were smuggling Levi jeans across the Berlin Wall because they too were kind of going through this thing with teenagers. So it you know, it traveled and it hopped around countries. Everyone was dealing with the teenager, and suddenly they were a category unto themselves. They had pocket money because they weren't being expected to just go straight from school to a job. They were kind of being allowed to figure themselves out a little bit because they were the first generation who could. You know, after the Great War, the war to end all wars wasn't the war to end all wars, and then there was World War II. I think adults felt particularly guilty and were like, let's let them have a little bit of a life. And suddenly they were off listening to music and drinking soda and going to the movies and wearing blue jeans, and skirts got shorter and tops got tied up at the waist. And yeah, so we suddenly have this category of teenage, and it's been kind of moving and shifting ever since. And definitely in the category of young adult literature, aside from those that were retroactively labeled YA, like The Outsiders and Catcher in the Rye, when they actually started writing books for teenagers, they were quite prosaic and a little bit moralizing until Judy Blume.
Right.
Judy Blume comes along and starts writing books about teenagers having sex. And she admits on her website, which is so old school HTML website still, but she has about her book Forever. She actually says she wrote that for her daughter, Randy. Real name. Her daughter's name was Randy. Her daughter actually asked her, Mum, can you please write a book where two teenagers have sex and neither of them has to
I
die?
remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah, she just wanted to read a book where two teenagers act responsibly and then part ways at the end because they've got to go off to university. But
Yeah.
there's no unexpected pregnancy and the girl's got to go away, you know, to an aunt in the country. None of that. It's just a love story and nobody has to die. It's not that, you know, it's not that catastrophic. And when
Yeah.
Judy Blume did that, she was one of the most banned books in America. Because she dared to write how teenagers actually live and exist, which is they have hormones, but they still have brains. They can act responsibly. They can do what so many other adults in the world have done, you know, just live a life. And it's so funny to think that we've come full circle again, where, you know, Judy Blume at the time was saying, you know, was explaining to her audience about Roe v. Wade, and then we've come full circle again to the most banned books in America would probably be something like Judy Blume's Forever once again, because it's not an abstinence only story. So yeah, Judy Blume totally changed the game. And from then on, suddenly YA books didn't have to be moralizing. They didn't have to be abstinence only and preaching. They could actually reflect the real lives of teenagers. And kind of ever since then, the readership, which is not a genre, it's a readership made of many genres. So you can have historical fiction YA, fantasy YA, contemporary YA, crime thriller YA. But ever since then, it has been changing for better and worse. And we're just currently in a time period of a lot of flux and change. And I put it down probably to social media is what's particularly changing it. I think TikTok in particular, as one of the first and really only social media platforms where it's not designed to be your community coming into your page. It's just like a free for all. You go on the page and it's algorithmically designed to your interests. So if you like books, you'll just be on the book page. And suddenly teenagers are interacting with adult readers. And as books trend that are not defined as being for adults or YA, they just are books that are trending. Suddenly teenagers want to read those books, even if they're not necessarily for them or the most appropriate for them. So the lines are being removed completely. The lines of discussion about how we get book recommendations are kind of being removed completely. And thus we're getting into a little bit of category shifting. But new adult was also like more of a 2009 concept by St. Martin's Press, and it didn't work.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was spicy, and it was like it was meant for the college readership, I guess.
Yeah, it was St. Martin's Press were trying to squeeze a little bit more dollar out of a readership, and we're trying to kind of keep YA readers with them moving through to adult fiction with this kind of stepping stone readership of new adult. You're no longer a baby YA. Maybe you're not yet ready for hardcore adult. So come to the new adult. And it didn't work. It was jeered at, really. Nobody really got it. The books that came out, I remember, because I was sent them as a book blogger at the time, they had parental guidance suggested stickers, like what, old Run DMC CDs used to have. And they were kind of laughed at. And the people who actually ended up taking that title of new adult on board were indie self-published romance authors who, in particular because of 50 Shades of Grey and Anastasia Steele, how do I remember that that's her name? Because I read the books and I've seen the movies. Anastasia Steele starts out in university. And so suddenly it was, if you loved 50 Shades of Grey, here's another university set romance. And it was indie romance, which is not a bad thing. Indie romance has pushed a lot of genres in interesting and new dynamic ways. Courtney Milan is one of my favorite historical fiction authors who left traditional publishing to become self-published because traditional publishing said, you can't write culturally diverse love interests in historical fiction. And she was like, yes, I can. And then, like 10 years later, Bridgerton's doing open casting and it's suddenly like, oh, yes, you can. But she decided to do that in the indie self-publishing space and she did it brilliantly, as have many others. But new adult was very much taken up by indie self-published romance authors. And they eventually got so big that a lot of traditional publishers acquired their books once they were proven in the indie self-published space. Like once you hit, and I've spoken to a publisher about this recently, and definitely they can watch the uptick on Amazon. Like they know if a book has been published on the Amazon platform, self-publishing, and they check it 1 week and the next week it suddenly jumped and has 5,000 reviews, and then they check it a week later and it's got 20,000 reviews, they can kind of track and see something's happening here. They've got analytics that they can check to see that
publishers are all grabby trying to get there before another publisher.
Totally.
You've started publishing some fiction in that realm, have you? So?
Yes, but not to talk about here.
Okay, not yet.
But, the category is very much pinned around hot young people, which is like university age, early 20s. And these books have trended big time on social media again, where the barriers between who are these books for and who's talking them and discussing about them are, falling away. So of course we're getting, and I also think just generally, maybe it is the teenagers are becoming more mature and a lot faster. I always think a gauge for that is when various organizations talk about when young people first encounter pornography on the internet and the age is getting younger and younger. Yeah. And they're not necessarily being sexualized, but they are being exposed to mature content a lot younger. Yeah. And it's interesting that it's gone a few different ways. Gen Z, which is the current crop of young people, are often talked about as being a very prudish generation. They have been, given questionnaires about this, and they've said things like they want less sex on their television screens. They feel uncomfortable when there's overt sexuality in films and TV and in their books that they read and stuff. And it's this is also a generation of young men who are going more to the alt-right, getting more conservative, who want also virginal good Christian girls, etc. So there's the alt-right rise, there's the kind of ballerina farms, clean girl aesthetic rise on the internet as well, which is also code for like Mormonism and religious conservatism. So this generation are quite prudish, and some people are speculating, is it because they were exposed so early to a lot of sexualized content and a lot of overt sexualization? They've been putting makeup on since they were 7 or 8 because they're mimicking what they saw on YouTube and TikTok. And what does that do when you are kind of made to look older than you are, earlier than you're meant to be, etc.? So there's all these questions about, is it teenagers asking for new adult literature for themselves, or is this adults wanting to read more new adult literature featuring young hot bodies? Who knows? So yeah, these conversations are hard to have, and they're hard to have in the book space because it's not just books being affected. This is kind of all different realms. And it's the sands are always shifting, but I fear that in talking about it, we often forget to put teenagers at the forefront of the discussions.
Very true.
And it becomes just, well, if we can make money from new adult, why wouldn't we? And one of the reasons is, well, because maybe teenagers don't want it. Maybe they feel weird that you're sexualizing their young bodies, you know,
Definitely.
which also comes back around to other forms of media. Like when I watched Euphoria, I became quite prudish because I was like, you're telling young people this is what their bodies are meant to look like without mentioning that these are actors in their late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, that's kind of gross that you're doing very erotic, I would say, scenes with teenage bodies. Like, why? Why are you doing that? It becomes weird when you sit with it and start asking these questions. And at the same time, having just discussed those authors who want to have written a book, sometimes when I have students who say that they're writing new adult and it's very sexualized new adult, I kind of ask them to envision sitting on a stage at like Sydney Writers Festival, talking to a cohort of high school students about why did you write this threesome in a new adult book intended for high school students if that's what you really think new adult is? It's for young adults, really. And suddenly it becomes weird. And it's like, yes, when you remember,
they're children.
yes,
They're children.
when you remember that this is actually a category for teenagers who are children, it becomes weird when you actually articulate why you were titillated to write about 18, 19-year-olds. It becomes a little bit odd.
That's interesting.
And I mostly have these conversations with people who insist on debating with me that new adult falls more in the young adult category than the adult category. I'm totally fine with people who are like, oh, it's totally adult fiction, because I want to go to the nth degree in those sex scenes. But I take issue with people in my class and elsewhere who insist that no, what I'm writing can be read by teenagers, because I'm like, no, that's weird.
It's weird, and maybe it should be like college fiction or something like that.
Totally.
Something that makes it really clear that it is for people who have left school and are 18 or over.
And
at least you have clear guidelines, because in the end people will read what they want to read and they'll find it if they want to read it, but you don't need to be forcing it down people's throats.
I always say, just because teenagers can read a book doesn't mean that it's for them. Right? Just because they're choosing to read that, that's great, that's fine. I was trying to read Anna Karenina at 15 because I wanted to be taken seriously.
And I read Judith Cranston. I read Judith Cranston at 14. You know, that kind of stuff.
I mean, people have been reading above where they probably should be.
Exactly.
On time, right? But it's how we categorize.
At no point did I think Tolstoy is writing for me, or like, you know, or J.D. Salinger was writing for, like, you know. So just because they can doesn't mean it's for them. And publishers have a very different responsibility to teenagers, particularly in this day and age of book banning. A publisher cannot be seen to be explicitly advertising a very X-rated book to teenagers, because that's weird. And it gets even weirder when you have to sort of justify it to the morality police, who will absolutely book ban anything for the slightest grievance, let alone a publisher stating that they're putting out a book that is potentially for teenagers but featuring threesomes and BDSM and God knows what in a new adult book. Like, suddenly when you really sit down and think about the moral implications of it, they do exist. So that's why I am big provocateur, but also not, for saying new adult exists. Totally, it's a category now. It's a subgenre that I would more align with romance, but it's a subgenre that is more aligned to adult fiction. And if you try and shoehorn it into YA, that's where we're going to have a problem, and I don't want any part of it.
Calling it a subgenre of romance is actually a great way to position it, because romance novels, one would say about romance novels, well, some teenagers will read them because that's what they're reading up as we as teenagers read books, but that's very clearly puts it in the adult space, romance novels.
Totally, absolutely. So I've just had people who have insisted that something that they're writing is for new adults, and they just think that that category is a catch-all for it's for teenagers and for 50-year-olds and for 70-year-olds and for 17-year-olds. And as an author and an agent, and I just want to say, that just sounds like wishful thinking, but also that you have no idea who you're writing for. And it's just going to
Yes.
be a hot mess on the page.
Yeah, because one of those things is not like the others, and that
Yes.
one of those things is teenagers.
Yeah, like just envision, do you really think that a 17-year-old is going to pass this book to their grandmother afterwards and be like, oh my God, Gran, it was so hot? Like, it's just not gonna happen. So yeah, just a little bit more consideration and care for the end point and for remembering who your audience is. Which, you know, I love when authors say that they don't think about the reader when they're writing, but that is a courtesy that children's authors don't really get, because they always have to be thinking about our audience when we're
That's
writing,
true. Yeah.
because we have a duty of care for them.
Yeah.
Because they are not adults. So
no, I never thought about that. That's very true.
So to turn around and be like, yeah, they can read all this sexy stuff that will, you know, is definitely beyond a PG-13 rating. It's like, well, no, you can't, because that becomes really odd once again. But you generally have a duty of care for your audience, and you have to remember that they are teenagers, they are children. Yeah. So yeah, that's my rant over about but I'm very passionate about it.
Well, I've got to say that was fascinating from the time you started talking about the development of young adult literature and the idea of the teenager. That I have never heard anything so succinctly put together before, and I had no idea about the role of the New York Public Library, for example, around that genre. So thank you for that, because I love that. I can listen to you talking about it forever. Maybe you should do a series. You know,
I do in fact do a little lecture about the history of the teenager.
Well, the internet, though.
Yeah, totally. I totally do. And I basically, the summation of it is, you don't get to YA fiction without going through the Industrial Revolution. So it is truly remarkable that we even have young adult literature and children's literature at all, because you do have to recognize the protected rights of the child in order to get there. So that's kind of remarkable. And it is why it's kind of what I remember to realize that I'm very lucky and honored to be writing for young people. And it is why I take my duty of care for them so seriously. Because, you know, we had to have an entire revolution to get to this point. So I'm very grateful.
Well, as I occasionally say to people, school exists because children were no longer allowed to work.
Yeah. Totally. So yeah, they do not crave the minds. That is not happening. We have to kind of keep them at our forefront, because Lord knows so many adults don't. So, you know, in our industry, we do think about them constantly because they are our prime audience, and we don't think about them as consumers. They are our audience. We have that duty of care, which I think is so important to them. So yeah, I'm very honored to be a children's author, and I will, you know, shout about putting teens to the front of their own readership until I'm hoarse, because it's the most important thing.
I love it.
Yeah, that is glorious. As a technical point and adjacent to that, because people who are going into children's bookshops, for example, looking to buy a book for a certain age of child, and as a former children's bookseller, I know that pretty much everyone who walks into a children's bookshop or bookshops that sell children's books need some help of some kind. So I have found in the past that the distinctions between, say, middle grade, young readers, or books around for those age groups can become a little bit blurry. So what are the distinctions that you would make in your field as an agent between those?
Yeah. So junior fiction early readers is kind of 8 and below, depending on where they're at with their reading abilities. 8 to 12-year-old is middle grade, and then everything kind of above that is YA. Absolutely. But the way that I categorize it is, in middle grade fiction, and this is the way that I think about it as a writer as well. In middle grade fiction, you're still going to feature characters who need the family unit, who still need adults in their lives. And young adult is where you're probably going to have characters who are beginning to ease away from the idea of, you know, the nuclear family, that they can start making their own family through friendship groups, etc. That's sort of the cutting of the apron strings between them. But very fundamentally, it all begins with like board books, baby books, the ones that babies can chew on because they're non-toxically printed, thinking that they're going to probably go ham hock on those things. Then we get into picture books. Then we get into junior fiction / early readers. They're like big text, probably still a few images on the page. They're probably starting to read a little bit more independently, but an adult's probably going to be sitting next to them, making sure that they're pronouncing every word correctly, knowing what a full stop is doing as a function. Then we get into a little bit more the junior fiction, which is like where they're probably very much newly independent readers. It's the Andy Griffiths of it all. It's the Aaron Blabies probably. and then we get into middle grade, and middle grade, like YA, is always a spectrum. So we begin at 8, and then the highest is like 12. So you can have lower end middle grade intended for readers who are probably 6, 7, 8, but very confident readers, and they can totally tackle a book that's for the lower end. And children do read aspirationally.
Mm-hmm.
So being a 6-year-old, you are fascinated with your 8-year-old older brother. So you would totally read a book with an 8-year-old character thinking, well, I'm nearly 8, even though you're 6. So that's adorable and that's fantastic. The same way that when you're 12 years old, you're probably really getting interested in like the secret lives of 15-year-olds. So I'm going to start hedging into YA. So yeah, you just have to think about what you were like at that age. And if you were 15 years old and somebody handed you a book with a 9-year-old protagonist, would you have read it? Mm-hmm. Probably not. You'd probably be starting to edge up the YA spectrum, going a little bit older. And yeah, at all points in time, young readers kind of self-censor, and they're not going to bother reading something that they just fundamentally do not understand, where they don't recognize, every 5th word on the page. So they're really great at self-censoring. And it's why my primary school teacher cousin came to me one day and said, hey, I'm teaching year 4. Do you think it's appropriate that one of my students is reading Sarah J. Maas? And I was like, no, that's not good. Did you observe this student reading? And she said, yeah, they were skipping a lot of pages.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, next time that you have reading hour for your class, go and sit with her and just say, hey, what's the book about? Which she did. And she like kind of admitted, I don't really know what's happening, but I can read it. And that was the difference of, yes, you can read it. You can recognize the words, but you're not comprehending what the story is. And it turned out this child was just a very advanced reader, and their parents evidently were just buoyed by that. So as soon as they requested a book, they were just like, yeah, sure, that you can read a YA book. You can read an adult book. That's amazing, without stopping to think, but should you?
Yeah.
Is just because you can, should you? So yeah, that's, age categories are always a little bit iffy and tricky, but generally kids will self-censor. And that's true for the actual subject matter as well. If there's some subjects that kids are just not ready to explore, they're not going to sit there and persevere for 200 pages. There's way cooler stuff that they could be doing. There's video games, there's the great outdoors, there's their friends on various devices. They're not going to sit there and persevere and be confused for 200 pages just to prove that they could read a book. It's not going to happen. So yeah, categorization in children's books is always ambitious. It's always wonderful. It exists for the reasons of, as I said, with publishers and authors, making life easier to think about who your audience is, in terms of comprehension, but also, trying to make things fun for them as well. So yeah, just because a child in grade 4 can read Sarah J. Maas, can physically understand a couple of the words, they're not going to comprehend it. But it doesn't mean that we should also have primary school libraries going off and buying all those books. And I do certainly, because I go to so many schools now and do workshops, I get lots of librarians asking me, should we buy this book for our library? And for primary schools in particular, I'm like, you know what? Don't buy Sarah J. Maas. Just don't. Let's just leave that for the high school librarians, who can, I would feel a lot more comfortable with a year 7 student reading that than someone in year 4 grabbing it off the shelf. So I have a lot of those kind of discussions with librarians, because the kids are asking for those books because they've heard about them generally online. And they've heard that those are the big books. And it's like, I get it. When I was a kid, I wanted to read the salacious Danielle Steels and, Thornbirds that seem titillating. But just because they want to read them doesn't mean you have to offer them to them in your public school library. So I have those conversations with librarians all the time. And it's generally just to assure them that they've made the right choice in not buying that set of books for the class, for the school library. Yeah, totally.
Well, Danielle, we've had you talking for quite a while, and you are on deadline for a new book. We were going to talk to you about your Substack writing about AI, but I reckon we should have you back if you're agreeable to that, because
totally.
Everything you've said has been fascinating, and I'm sure that anyone or listening will feel the same way. I've been riveted for the entire time.
And I feel like if you give it like a good 2 to 3 months, something else will happen in the AI space that'll make it even more pertinent. And I may have another spray that I can totally talk about how much I hate Meta. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll get in touch with you separately. But for the time being, I'm going to thank you profoundly and profusely. Thank you for being here. I'll let Rach talk now because I've just talked then. Rach, what do you
No, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, exactly as I knew it would be. And so thank you for the time and good luck on your deadline.
Thank you so much. Love gas bagging with you two. And I'm just glad that we were able to do it here and I wasn't accosting you, Rachel, during your writing time at a Perth festival.
I'm sure that didn't really make much difference towards
from memory. You
deadline.
were reading / looking out the window.
Yeah,
and I'm
pretty sure I was
wandered in.
You see, I should know myself by now. I always think I'm going to be more like productive,
Yeah.
one of those writers that write on airplanes and in the spaces between. I heard Candice Fox says once that when she was on tour, she wrote like 1,000 words over the breakfast buffet. I'm like, oh, I'm just
Rachel, take it from me. You're highly productive.
Oh my God, yeah. If you're not productive, I don't even want to think what I am. So I'm gonna bow out now before I hear you say anything else.
All right, well,
we're going to put you on. We're going to put it on pause, Danielle, and say goodbye to you properly off screen. But I'll put this on pause now and thank you very much officially.
Thank you.
I feel like that was a masterclass, Rach.
In two things, 2 masterclasses.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that was. Danielle is brilliant. She's a brilliant writer. She's also just brilliant generally. And I've been a guest speaker at her RMIT class. So I know she has a really dedicated student body whomever she's teaching at the time, and they learn.
I wish I had teachers like her when I was at uni.
She's awesome.
Writing.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm recovering over here.
I know. I need to lie down.
Well, I think I don't know if you have anything else to tell our listeners / viewers at this point in time.
No, I don't think so. Just thanks for listening to us again. And if you do, want to leave us a review wherever you listen or watch, we would definitely, appreciate that.
And we're also always happy to take suggestions for subjects. We have covered quite a few subjects in our 3 seasons thus far, but always happy to take suggestions if there's something that we haven't cover that you'd like us to talk about. We do try to have themes for each episode, so it's not just a matter of covering a new release, for example, just because it's new. When we are covering new releases, it's because we can think of a subject to talk to the author about. So always happy to take your suggestions, or if you just want to hear us rabbiting on about ourselves, it's also a suggestion. But we do like to, mix it up. Anyway,
we're happy to offer some writer therapy if you're a writer in a crisis.
That's right. We have done that twice now, and we've recorded the second one. It's not out yet, but we will put it out.
With more to come.
Yeah. So thanks for being here, audience.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks for being here, Rach.
You too. Bye.
Bye.